The proceeding.
Order, order. Welcome to the meeting of the Speakers Committee for the Electoral Commission. We're here today to consider the main estimate for 2024-25 for the Local Government Boundary Commission for England and the Electoral Commission. We'll hear firstly from the Boundary Commission. Could our witnesses introduce themselves for the record, please?
I'm Ailsa Irvine. I'm the Chief Executive of the Local Government Boundary Commission for England.
I'm Kathryn, Trower. I'm the Interim Director of Corporate Services.
I'm Colin, Mellors. I chair the Commission.
Can I say welcome, and welcome to the new role as well. What are your first impressions, Alicia, about the boundary reviews? Can I just tempt you a little?
Well, I've been really excited to be here and very grateful for the very warm welcome I've had from the team, both the staff and the commissioners. And I think it's very clear to me that we've got a team that are absolutely committed to what they do and really care about delivering high quality reviews and delivering good electoral equality. I think my initial impression is that we've got the people and processes that we need to be able to continue to deliver our review programme effectively. I think what I want to do is to really work with the team to interrogate that fully, to make sure that we really are being as efficient as we can be, and to see if there's anything more that we can do to further drive the pace and the robustness of what we do. But effectively, I think what I'm seeing is an organisation that works well, and I'm keen just to fit in and see what we can do to make it even better.
Thank you for that. Colin, can you give us a quick run-through from the LGBCE's performance in last year and planning assumptions used for 2024 budget?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by saying thank you to you and to your fellow members for this annual invitation to come and talk to you about our work and explain what we do and receive your advice. It's very much as I said in the letter which I accompanied the submission of our estimates. It's that we've met all of our requirements and the things that we planned to do during the year in terms of reviews. So we completed the 26 reviews we said we would, affecting about 6 million electors in total. All of them were done on time for their implementation at the desired election, and we've stuck within our budget, but my colleagues will explain a little bit more about that. For what it is worth, we've also met all of our three key KPIs. And as you'll see in our annual report when we publish it in the summer, that the data shown in our management information statistics are also quite encouraging. So that's our core business, that's the day job as it were. In addition to those things, we've completed, we've agreed 6 related alterations. These are sort of minorish things, but they matter to people on the ground and they take quite a bit of time for us. It's where we realign our district our ward or division boundaries so that they are aligned with changes in local boundaries such as the parishes and town councils, and that does matter to them, so we do that. We've also done during the year our first principal area boundary review for a while, and that is the abutting of the area, I think it's around the Uterbridge, Stocksbridge area between Sheffield and Barnsley to accommodate a new housing development which is split in half by the current boundary, and both local authorities were keen on that happening. We've completed that work, and I think the Minister will know better than I. I think that order is going to be laid by DLUC at some point in the coming future. Those are reviews things. We've also taken the opportunity to refresh our website. I'm sure that Mr. Betts will be asking some more questions about that in a minute. We've got a new mapping tool. It's got a strange name called Esri Suite, which allows us to do real-time mapping. So if we're going and looking at a place, we can type in draw in the new boundaries, and automatically tells us what the numerical implications of that are. And also, hopefully, it will reduce the incidences where there might be errors due to transcription as well. We continue our people strategy, and perhaps the final thing, well, penultimate thing, is that we've signed a memorandum last summer with the the Boundary Commission for England and to Justice Lane. I thought there were opportunities for doing things together, respecting our different statuses, different legislation, but particularly in the fact because where we're a continuing body, they're episodic in their reviews. So to keep them involved in something during that fallow period, but more importantly to help them gear up when the next parliamentary review comes around. Finally, not least, we've made some new appointments, as you've observed already, Mr. Speaker. We've welcomed very welcomed. I wrote down what you said, Ailsa. We welcomed a new chief exec, which we're delighted. We've got a new interim director of corporate services. We were about to appoint a search for a new one. We've got a new director, communications manager, and I've welcomed a new commissioner. So all in all, it's been fairly busy. Going forward, we're going to continue to do the same mix of reviews, periodic, intervention and request reviews going forward, and also in particular with a fresh pair of eyes, the lessons of what worked well during the pandemic, and some things did actually work very well during the pandemic, and the opportunity of a move to new premises to look at all of our processes, review our ways of working, the footprint and the resources, and also to focus on a particular challenge for us, an issue, and that is making sure it's easy for local people, local organisations and local authorities to engage with our process. Frankly, we could not do without their cooperation, and we want to spend a lot of time this year seeing how we can make it even better.
Thank you for that.
And the consequences of that are in our numbers.
Excellent. Very intrigued the fact that you've realigned a village to make sure it makes sense. There's a village called Buckshaw Village in Chorley in South Ribble, where if you go down the street, one door's in one, you go another 3 doors and it moves back again. The village is split all over by a stream running through the middle. So I think it's a great example of what you managed to achieve in Sheffield. I do hope you'll give further consideration for sorting those boundaries out, which would help me and my neighbour. Now then, allowing for my self-interest, can I ask you about the small increase in your resource, the DL request in your estimate? How can you keep within the budget envelope for 2025 without the need for a supplementary estimate?
So, yes, we think we could keep within the budget if it's awarded in full in the main estimate. We have the assumptions that we put in, that we laid out in the memorandum that went with it. So 4% inflation across our non-pay areas, 5% in relation to staff. We've looked at our establishment. We have full establishment, so we don't have much room in relation to vacancies. And the premises cost at the moment will remain static because we will use the savings hopefully in the second half of the year to cover the costs of moving. And we have, of course, put in the new revised rate for the employer pension contribution. So it's a very, very small budget, as you can see. It's 2.78 million. 1% of that is only £27,000. I think that's important to be remembered. We have a risk and resilience budget in their line of 4%, which is 106,000, and that forms a key and crucial part of our overall budget. We do have a few unknowns, which is why that budget is quite important. So at the moment, we are still working with the GPA to actually get a fixed exit date, what the final costs of clearance and moving will be. So we do have some quite significant unknowns still that we are reliant on.
Excellent, thanks for that. Your capital rate budget has reduced to 50,000 after development of your new website. Is this reduced amount still predominantly for IT cost? As per 2023-24, what is the risk of the additional capital needs because of the move to new accommodation?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that's my question as well. So the £50,000 is to cover 2 key areas. So we obviously need to ensure that our technology remains fit for purpose. That's absolutely key and crucial to us. We want to make some, some investment into our SharePoint platform. So we make sure that it remains secure, organised, and we can share the information across the organisation. We'd like to do some further enhancements to our website. And then the remainder is actually linked in relation to our premises moves. So we will need to put some IT infrastructure costs and some fixtures and fittings.
Thank you for that. Clive?
Yes, we'll move on to staffing. So how have you got to your assumptions about the staff you're going to need for the next year? Are you absolutely certain you've got a figure that's robust and there's nothing coming down the line that could possibly derail it and cause you to come back for more money for more staff?
Well, in terms of where we're at with our headcount, we've once again budgeted for 21.5 FTE, which is consistent with what we had for last year. I'm confident that we can deliver the review programme that we have scheduled for the next financial year within that envelope. However, obviously, as part of the work that I'm doing to look at the review process end to end to try to identify if there is anything that we would want to do differently, it may be in future financial years that we do want to look again at whether that is the right level of headcount, but it's certainly enough for us to be able to get through the work programme for the next year.
Right. Let's move on to the issue of that review process then. And apparently the number of authorities that haven't been reviewed for a long period of time, in 14 years, has reduced, and you're going to get that down to 10 years, I think, to 10 authorities. That's the intention. Why are there still 10 authorities? Is there a problem with them?
That one up. It's one of the most difficult questions to answer because of the way that our reviews operate over a number of years, but also we mix the reviews up between periodic and intervention and request reviews. Our periodic reviews at the moment, I think I was asked this question, a very similar one by last year. At that stage, we thought there were 39. We've reclassified one of them, so actually there are 40 which have not been reviewed for 14 years. The reason there's been a significant number is because our predecessor body reviewed all authorities within a fairly chunky period of time. Where we've moved, I think it was much more sensible, for reasons I'll explain, to a rolling programme of about 20, starting 25 a year. The output varies a little bit, but nothing gets lost in the machine. But some do take a little bit longer than the others. So we've got 40 at the moment, which have not been reviewed since our creation in 2010. 15 of those were started during the year just about to end. A further 17 will be started during the next year, and the final 8, I think that adds up to 40, will be started in 25-26. So they will all are on our programme. Clearly, in a few years' time, some new ones will come back in that were done in 2010. So it's a continuing programme. But they are all going to be there, and they will all be done in that appropriate time. When we set up our review programme, and it's really quite important, I was going to say it in terms of one of the answers to your previous question, Mr. Betts, that can we cope? We have a 5-year rolling programme with years 1, 2 and 3 pretty certain, years 4 and 5 more flexible. That means that we're able to accommodate things when something comes along. I think particularly where there's been restructuring, we were asked by the department to bring Thurrock forward a little bit because we were going to, a couple of years' time, we've been able to do that. We have that flex to be able to make sure that the one thing we don't want to do is say no to a review, which has been occasioned either by the local authority or by the department, where it is felt that a review would play a part in supporting them address some of the challenges, whether it's in terms of governance, size of the council, the electoral cycle, etc. And we work very closely with your civil servants, Minister, in terms of the 4 new unitaries, and previously in Cumbria, North Yorkshire, get this right, and Somerset, to give them temporary arrangements, interim arrangements, so they could get started, and then we're now going to do them properly in time for their implementation in 27. So that's how we're going to get through them. We've tended to prioritise intervention reviews because the impact of having unequal electorates is felt immediately, because some of the ones that we're doing periodically, the numbers stack up, but we do need to test whether they're still the right ones. And also them and request reviews, we tend to prioritise those, but they're all now on our programme. They will all go off. It will be easier in future because it is now a rolling programme for all of the ones, so there should be a steady stream. And frankly, a final sentence you'll be relieved, is that it makes it much more sensible and efficient, I think, for us to have this rhythm, steady rhythm, rather than episodic, which predecessor bodies have. And frankly, it's better for the local authorities because we know they know we're coming our way, and they know when we're likely to be coming, so they can plan accordingly.
One of the things that often, I think, confuses the electorate, as well as elected representatives, is the disjuncture between the work you do and that done by the Parliamentary Boundary Commission, which often leads to ward boundaries and constituency boundaries completely different to each other, often having to split wards to get constituencies of the right size. Yeah. Given that where you've got authorities with very large local authority wards, that makes the job of the Boundary Commission, Parliamentary Boundary Commission, harder. Yep. Do you give any thought to that when looking at your future programme?
In essence, we use parish as the building blocks for our warding stroke divisions. Yeah. and the Parliamentary Boundary Commission uses ours as the pattern, the building blocks for theirs. There are some challenges. Firstly, of course, that the key driver for parliamentary constituencies is the number, with a variance of 5% either way. Not much wriggle room. And they also work on a backdated register. So they're looking at an electoral roll, which is already 3 or 4 years out of date by the time of the next election. The legislation, which is wisely constructed, but sometimes a bit difficult to estimate, is we look forward. So we are required to look at what the electorate's going to be like 5 years after we finish our review, and that means therefore working closely with the local authorities to see where developments are likely to come about, what size they are, how they're going to be phased, and those things will be affected by the nature of the economy, the cost of mortgages, the attitudes of construction companies, and they need to sell off one phase before they can do the next one. In an ideal world, you would close it down and start afresh. We can make it work, and we're cognizant of these things, and I think the parliamentary one that is. But I know in your part of the world there are two. I think in the suggestions for Yorkshire, which cross not only local authority boundaries but also combined authority boundaries, because it's balancing the numbers. And in local government we have 4-year terms of office, Parliament has up to 5-year terms of office, we have 3 criteria that we satisfy, and if you look at any grouping of local authorities, whether it's the London boroughs or the districts or the Met districts or the counties, there's probably a 3-fold difference in the ratio of the number of electors per councillor. We don't think that's a bad thing, because we take the view that all 300 odd local authorities are unique entities, and we work closely with them to make sure we satisfy what the legislation says, alongside making sure that they have the most effective governance arrangements for their own authority. I think that seems to me healthy, but it is sometimes a little bit difficult to explain and interpret.
I think what you're saying to me is not merely are the timings of the 2 reviews separate, but the criteria on which they're undertaken are different.
Yes.
So it's chance if they happen to coincide with each other.
No, we look we look very carefully at coterminosity. We do look very carefully at that, but we can't always achieve it between the counties and the component districts, and certainly not with the parliamentary ones. But it's like many things in our constitution, Mr. Speaker. I think it works. We make it work in some way or another. But it's not the neatest of patterns, but it has very good intellectual bases behind it. We try our best.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for your estimates, etc. Can I just take you back to the just a couple of points that you've been covering a moment or so ago? I know when you assisted us in my county of Dorset when we went unitary, I think that there were significant benefits there where we had a local boundary review, so there were all new wards created. We didn't just overlay the county council, and therefore no sitting councillor thought they had sort of, first dibs at the seat. Nobody had grandfather rights, for want of a better phrase. From your experience, when councils reorganise, go unitary, whatever, is there tangible merit in terms of helping that new authority bed in by starting from scratch with their ward boundaries?
I think I understand what you're getting at there. Thank you very much for your comments on Dorset and when we did Bournemouth and Poole, Christchurch at that same time. And I agree with you. I share that view that having completely new boundaries gets rid of old affiliations, because it is a new authority. It's not a merged authority. I mean, in the 2 Suffolks, for example, they're not merged authorities. They are new authority. So if there is a degree of fluidity in those boundaries, they help. Forgive me, please press me if I'm missing the point you make, is yes, I think there are benefits to them. We had the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny do some work for us on what made a good review. My own view is, and Ailsa, when we have lots of meetings with local authorities at the outset to prepare them for this. The phrase we always try to remember to use is we want to do reviews with them and not to them. We're a statutory body, we will have consistent criteria, but we're applying them to very different political settings. So we work very closely with them. The Centre for Governance and Scrutiny review said that 2 of the characteristics that bring out the best in reviews is, one is where there's buy-in from the local authority leadership, both chief exec and the and the political leadership. So they're not just grudging about it, they're engaging with it. Because we're here to ensure our bit in helping bring about fair elections. We want them to gain some benefit for their efforts in it. So to understand to get that buy-in. And secondly is if they are clear what they're wanting out of it as well. Because we do want them to get benefits out of it in terms of governance, reconnecting with local communities, democracy. So I can't claim that we are going to be greatly... We can't resolve all of your work for you and all the challenges that local authorities have, but we like to think we're working with your colleagues in the department and particularly in local authorities to get that. We want them to get value from the work we're doing as well as be able to satisfy the remit that Parliament has given to us.
That gives me an opportunity just to put on record my thanks as the local government minister and officials for the work that you do. Turning back to the estimates, were there to be a rash or a rush of local authorities which were changing their administrative architecture, do you have capacity to work alongside them at pace on local government boundary reviews?
We will do our best. There is some degree of flex in it. It depends upon the scale of the rush or the rash of restructuring. But the one thing I don't want ever to do is to put ourselves in a position where we have to say no to people who want something to happen. And sorry, that has occasionally pushed the PER back a little bit, but we think we can overcome that. I mean, if it was of a huge scale, then we would look to you. The one thing, if I may put in a little wish here, is it makes it easier if we are able to confirm the numbers in advance of any reorganisation, which we did in Dorset, which we didn't manage to do in Buckinghamshire and Northamptonshire, and the order had slightly different wording, as I recall, which had some implications. We had a nice midway approach in North Yorkshire, which has worked very well. Namely, we got a feel for the size. You constructed with our advice, because we can't do it, and you can't draw new boundaries. With our advice, we constructed some boundaries using existing local authority wards and even parishes to get something that is workable at roughly the same size as we anticipate they will emerge. But anything that makes sure that we're consistent in that, if I may make that plea, and gives us that opportunity, and perhaps we could have a discussion if this is likely to emerge. But certainly, if there was a massive explosion, then obviously we will be knocking on the door. We hope our budget is being constructed to enable us to overcome that. But certainly, I can give you our assurance, we don't want to turn away people who genuinely would find our work helpful.
Mr. Speaker, I don't want Dorset to outdo Chorley in its parochial examples, but I'll.
Couldn't.
It couldn't. We can have a go. But on the corporate plan, page 5 of 11, you state we aim to, this is in chapter 2, that within each authority, each councillor represents a similar number of electors. Yep. I can think of two housing proposals, one which is still in the planning stage, one of which is being built out, whereby a small c conservative estimate, the quantum, when development is finalised, would greatly exceed the number of residents within each ward. What's the trigger in those circumstances in order to ensure a relatively fair and equitable burden of work between councillors and the number of residents they have to serve? Because when you embark upon a boundary review, it can't be done in isolation, clearly. It has knock-on effects to other wards. It changes loyalties and affiliations. It may very well tip and change the likely political outcome at an election because a new piece is coming in, etc. Do you find councils come to you, because Dorset will not be alone in that, and saying, we need you to have a look, or are they sort of the precautionary principle, let sleeping dogs lie?
We look at the data every year to see what's happened in terms of change, and as I say, that...
What, in terms of new housing developed?
We look at the electoral roll each year to see where variances are. The triggers for us doing what we could... I wish we could think of a better word, because intervention in local government is usually a little bit more severe than the intervention that we do. But that means that we do an early review, because there's inequality. Our definitions of unsatisfactory inequality is either 30% of wards have a variance of more than 10% from the norm for that local authority, just for that one local authority, or a single ward has a variance of more than 30. That latter is occasionally a little bit of a challenge in places like Sheffield, in university cities, where the level of student registrations, which is very compressed usually, in particular one or two wards, can cause impact on that. So we keep an eye on that. If it goes over that trigger point, we then would contact the local authority and ask them, is this likely to self-correct in any way? Mm-hmm. If it doesn't self-correct, then they're clearly on our radar, and we would then go and discuss with them when we would come in and do a review. In doing a review, we wouldn't just adjust the area where the development's taking place. All the lines, bar the external parameters, come back into play.
Yes. Well, thank you. Just one supplementary on that, if I may. And you must forgive my ignorance on this, but in order, rather than to sort of throw not just the baby out with the bathwater, but all the toys as well that they've been playing with in the bath, what powers, if any, do you have in those circumstances to say, look, this is a one-member ward, the population has gone up, we should make this a two-member ward, this should be a three-member ward? That doesn't fall within your powers, and if it doesn't, should it?
Don't think so, because we would want to look at the totality of the area. So we would not just do an adjustment to a particular bit, because it's unusual that the only trigger of change has been at one particular development. It would be at a place where we would want to look across the totality. So in doing it, as I say, we remove all of them, and then we have three drivers under statute that we have to look at. One is about the numbers, to make sure there's that equality. Secondly, something called community identity. We want the boundaries to reflect people's beliefs in communities, either behavioural communities, where patterns of living, or conscious, you'll have heard this from many years back, Rachel. Community identity, or effective and convenient local government, where the boundaries that make sense. So we would look across the totality of those, and we would want to do that. We balance that. In terms of the numbers, there's an added thing. I don't know if you can have 4 dimensions. I know you can have 3, but if the fourth one is...
You'll be lenient. There was many as you like.
The fourth one is that if it's an authority that elects by thirds, then the legislation gives us a fourth criteria, and that is the desirability that everybody should have elections by thirds, therefore there should be all 3-member wards. We quite like it when they don't do that, because frankly in some places a single member is the right solution, in other words a 2 or a 3 is the right solution.
Can I
but on that point, sorry, just to come back on that point, you're absolutely right, but if you have got a small community with a single member ward, that's ruled out if you want elections every year, and therefore it distorts the pattern. So you've got to go to 3-member wards in order to keep elections annually, and on that basis you put communities together who might not have been, in order to meet the numbers of requirement for the balance of
You're extraordinarily perceptive, Mr. Speaker. We get as many, if not more, submissions of people saying we don't want to be associated with that community, rather than please don't separate us from that community. I will allow you to draw your own conclusions why that might be the case.
Well, I think...
Sorry, just to finish on that, and just to go, quite right, we've done the Dorset one, to finish off on the Chorley one, the strange thing about the Bookshaw villages, it's in 2 constituencies, it's in 2 parishes and 2 complete districts, and a stream that runs everywhere. So if there was ever a way of trying to balance something out, that would be my challenge for you. Sorry.
I was just going to add a further bit of reassurance about when we're taking on a new review and we're working with the local authority. We work with them at the outset to look at what the forecast electorate will be 5 years after the review will end. So in doing that, we will take into account and work with them to understand where the local plan says there's going to be development, so that we do try to anticipate where there is likely to be large developments as well, so that that can be worked in and worked through and reflected in that review, which hopefully then mitigates against the need for development coming. So it should hopefully not be unforeseen, and it should mean that we're able to pick that up so that the discrepancies don't arise.
First of all, say thank you, Professor Mellors and the team. Very much.
Sorry, thank you very much. Can I also express the satisfaction? I'm a Sheffield lad, like Clive Bett, so thank you for allowing a Sheffield lad to join in this discussion about...
Is that Wednesday or you know?
I can tell you which boundaries I want next time, can I? We'll be all right, yeah, okay. Right.
Oh, you'd already got what you wanted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, thank you very much. I welcome our guests from the Electoral Commission. Can I say welcome, Vijay, personally? Good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
The new hat. Well, welcome on board. And John, could you please introduce your commission, your team, for the record?
Okay, well, I'm John Pullinger. I'm chair of the Electoral Commission, and on my right is Vijay Rangarajan, who has started in the role of Chief Executive as of Monday of this week. On my right is Rob Vincent, who is the outgoing Interim Chief Executive, and we agreed to have the two of them together for this week only, so Rob will be leaving at the end of this week. And on my far left is David Moran, who is our Interim Finance Director.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Rob, for what you've done to keep the ship going as well. Rachel, can I hand over to you?
Thank you. Vijay, welcome to your new role, week one, and you're in front of us already, but be interested in your sort of first impressions of the Commission, what you see as the key challenges, and particularly in this general election year.
Great. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the invitation to be here. So it's day 3, so these are tentative first impressions. I think the first is, as I've met quite a lot of staff and members of the Commission itself, is what a dedicated and expert bunch they are, who know their things. They've got a very heavy year ahead. And I think there's quite a sense of, can we get through 2024, deliver, obviously, the local elections and all the elections in May, and then on to a parliamentary general election. I'll be visiting and meeting all members of staff and visiting Belfast, Edinburgh and Cardiff in the next month to kind of take stock. Internal challenges, I think some of them appear in the estimates in front of you. So we have capability challenges on things like finance and procurement. There's been a huge amount of good work done on that. But I think what's high on my list of issues, building on the work that Rob and many others have done, and David, to try to improve the capabilities there. Externally, my first impression is some of the themes that I encountered when working in this area in 2009 to 12 are very similar. So voter registration, the need to improve registration, still a challenge in some areas. Some of the complexity of administration and law, really significant. Combination of polls. A lot of these issues are similar, but some are now an order of magnitude different. And I think I'm thinking here about online and physical threats to candidates. That's something completely different to what I'd seen in the past. We're obviously taking this very seriously, and it's been a pleasure, I think, for the teams to work with the Minister and his teams on, for example, the changes to the regulations on security expenditure and how we count that. We will do what we can there and are ramping up work on that. And then finally, I think there are some very big new challenges which we're trying to grapple with, like everyone is, generative AI and deep fakes, cyber attacks. And the world keeps on moving, and I think part of the role that clearly I will have working for the Commission board and with many in the Commission is how do we keep going with this ever-changing set of threats. So we'll learn a lot of lessons in May, and we'll try and learn lessons from the many other elections around the world, who I think, for particularly our closest allies and partners, will be threatened in the same way, and we'll try and keep up to speed with what's a rapidly changing picture of threat and opportunity. But thank you again.
Just bring the Minister in on that point.
Thank you and welcome. I think we're meeting
next week.
Next week, yeah, which I look forward to. I'm almost going to sort of tee up one of the things I want to talk to you about, which is you've mentioned the threat of AI and deep fakes and the like. In the minds of the electorate, which is often very sort of suspicious of we mere elected earthlings, there's the tendency to have the sort of Christine Keeler defence. Well, you know, they would say that, wouldn't they, in response to a deep fake or that sort of thing. How can the Commission carve out a role as being the authoritative comfort voice to the electorate to assert that something is a deep fake or is not? Because I'm struggling to find or to think of another body that has the, I don't think it exists quite yet, but has the capability to fulfill that rather important function.
I think the first thing to say is, from what I've seen so far, we don't have the capability or the technical expertise to actually check on what is a deepfake or not. Interesting, some of the team have been talking to social media companies about whether they do. In some cases, they may have. And I think, obviously, the legislation will put a lot of burden on them initially. In other cases, other parts of government will be able to see what is possible. So I'm not sure we are going to be the only part of the solution, but we'll work very closely with others, particularly for voices needed to give voters trust the election is being well run. Clearly, some of this may also be picked up in post-poll analysis and reporting, and we'll certainly play our role in that. But I have a feeling this is moving so quickly, we will also look, as I said, at lessons from around the world, the Irish elections, the European parliamentary elections, obviously the American election, and see how they're coping with it and what is the limits of both technically possible and what is helpful to say to sustain voter trust in the run-up to an election.
Thank you, Mr.
Just to slightly answer that, I've done a meeting last couple of days about the security and the influence of foreign actors, how we deal with it. If I was to speak with the Minister in private afterwards to give some reassurance, you're absolutely right, it's how we go house against and around to ensure that that doesn't take place, and how do we call it out. It is absolutely important, but I will speak afterwards in private. Rachel.
Thank you. Back to the estimates. Between John, maybe at first, can you give us a quick opening run through of the main estimate for 24-25 and the planning assumptions used?
I'm going to pick up really on the themes that Vijay has already illustrated. So, I mean, the overall estimate is that we believe we need an extra £15 million in the estimate in order to deliver what is required of us in the coming year. The vast majority of that increase is focused on the general election and focused on, first of all, supporting voters, making sure that they can get registered, making sure they can cast their vote, in particular to make sure they understand the requirements around voter ID and how to make sure they have got it, but also how they can combat fraud and a whole variety of other issues that will concern voters in this election, how we can support them in doing that. Secondly, how we can support parties and campaigners, and that includes non-party campaigners. And Vijay has identified some of the threats around online and personal abuse, intimidation and whatever, and so we will play our part in that along with the police and others. But very prosaically also in terms of our role as a financial regulator to make sure people understand the rules about where money can come from and make sure it's properly and transparently accounted for as to how it's been spent in line with the limits. And then finally, and very actively at the moment, that will continue, is supporting electoral administrators. Understand what their legal obligations are and support them with the practical activities they need to accomplish to achieve that. And I pay tribute here to the Minister and his colleagues. There's very active joint working between the government and the Electoral Commission on very practical issues like the post. How will Royal Mail actually be confident it can be delivered? And there's a lot of detailed work going on, but a lot of good joint work between government officials and Commission officials. So the biggest chunk is for that. The next section is it's not just about the general election this year. We have some big elections already slated for May, some of them in areas where there hasn't been voter ID before, so particularly London and Wales. So really helping ensure electors in those places can vote with confidence, and all of them can vote and no one is disenfranchised. But also we need to be ready for unexpected elections, and you'll recall from the discussions we had with you about our supplementary estimate, we hadn't anticipated the number of by-elections that were coming our way, so we've made an allowance in case there are by-elections. We can really just get on with it and not get into financial difficulties as a result. So most of the money is relating to elections. The rest of it is in two chunks, roughly equal chunks. The first is about capability, and Vijay's already named the two areas, and the areas where, despite amazingly effective work by our teams, we have concluded we need to have more. The first is IT and cyber, generally. We got a lot of support from the National Cyber Security Centre and others last year after our cyber attack to help us understand what we need to do to protect ourselves. But that's part of a much wider IT infrastructure change to enable us to support parties and others work with us so we can do our work. And the second one, which has also already been mentioned, is our capability in finance, to make sure we can provide good estimates to you reliably each time, but also we had a very good interchange with the National Audit Office over our accounts last year that's given us some really good detail into how we can improve things. And the final section of the estimate is other contingencies. And here I think we've picked up very closely from the conversation we last had with you as a committee, to put in a contingency for pay that if we don't need to draw it down, to put in contingencies for inflation similarly, and for other unknown unknowns. So a reasonable set of assumptions that we put in there. We may get into those as we go along, but to make sure we have contingencies there that are transparently out there, that will not be drawn down if we don't need them, but if we do need them, we'll be able to get on and spend that money with your blessing, and we can account for you at the end of the year as to how we've done that.
Thank you. The Secretary of State's now designated the strategy and policy statement in respect of the Electoral Commission, and how has that featured in the budget planning, so to speak, and do you expect its introduction to impact on your budgeting and finances and costs for 24-25?
Well, first of all, the Minister and I have corresponded, and the key point which has been very helpful to the Commission Board is the emphasis that the Minister has placed on that the strategy and policy statement doesn't compromise the independence of the Commission's actions. So on that basis, there is not a budgetary consequence for the Commission of the SPS. So we will, in making our decisions, pay regard to the strategy and policy statement alongside all of the other considerations that we need to take into account, which is what we do and plan for already. So the short answer to your question is there is no impact, but in making that comment, I acknowledge the active work we've had with the Minister to make sure that we really understand what the government's intention is here and can make sure we respect it.
So just going to start to drill down a bit more into the budget for the coming year. The overall estimate for Ardale 24-25 is 48% higher than the final budget for last year, 23-24. And you mentioned the general election earlier, but can you just go into a little bit more detail of how much the increase can be attributed to the general election this year?
Well, I'll point to Rob in a minute, but the 48% is the 15 million I spoke about. Mm-hmm. 10 million of that relates directly to elections. And the other 5 is reasonably evenly split between these capability increases and, 2.5 million for contingencies of various kinds. But I don't really want Rob to drill down further into that.
Well, any other comments to add to that?
No, you might want to unpick any part of that in more detail, but there's nothing to add at that level, I don't think, to the summary. Yeah.
And given the conversations we have had with the supplementary estimates, etc., how confident are you that the Commission can work within that budget for 24-25, contingencies included, you know?
Well, to set off on that, we were fearless least with the meeting with you over the supplementary estimate, and you have some very clear advice to us over that. The first thing I should say, I think, is that we are determined to live within our main estimate for the year ahead. The messages we took away were that we needed to strengthen the process by which we drew up our main estimate, and the Chair has already referred to the way in which we've strengthened our financial analysis and consolidation team, and that's under David. He may want to say more about that. That's in place, some of it funded from the supplementary estimate, all of it funded within the main estimate for the year ahead. The Chair has already referred to a more substantial set of contingencies in the main estimate this time round, and that was a very direct message from you. My interpretation of it was better to put in a contingency and not have to call it down than to find yourself having to come back for a supplementary estimate at the end of the year. And we heard that very clearly. You were very courteous in expressing it, but it was a fairly emphatic message which we took away. And you'll find, actually, if we go through the detail of the main estimate, there are the contingencies for most of the substantial areas of expenditure, certainly for the communications around the general election process, for the cyber provision, for likely pay provision, for possible further costs of our next corporate strategy, which won't come into place until the following year, but we may begin to take impact from that before we get to 25-26. And then we put in a general contingency of 1.25%. We will not draw down that money if we don't need to have it. With the care which has gone into building the main estimate in the first place, plus those contingencies, I think we can never give you a 100% guarantee, but that we are pretty determined that we will not have to come back to you for a supplementary estimate. The other message we took away was that if we do find ourselves facing circumstances where those provisions are not adequate and we may have to come back to ask you for money, we should do so when we recognise that they are rising and not just come back at the end of the year and ask you for sort of forgiveness and provision. We should come to you earlier and discuss the implications of what might be rising. At the moment, we don't anticipate that, but we also took that message away from us and it's now deep within us.
Yes, come on to staffing. 5% pay increase. How did you arrive at the figure? Did you consult the Treasury or any other bodies in arriving at it?
Thank you. First of all, the 5% was derived at independently of any dialogue with Treasury. Treasury don't normally give any indicators, and I'm aware that correspondence has suggested likewise that Treasury wouldn't be sharing or supporting a particular increase at this time when they're prior to negotiations. As to how the 5% was derived, it was derived from three things. First of all, we were looking at wider understanding of market expectations in terms of employer expectations. We particularly honed in on the income data research, the IDR work, that showed that 48% of medium to large employers were expecting an increase of between 4 and 4.99%, and a further 24% were expecting an increase of 5% or more. Based on that information, we felt that 5% didn't seem unreasonable. The other two areas are the cost of living. The CPI in both December and January has come out at 4%. And the final one is the awareness of the Staff Association demands, and in particular that their demands include a cost of living rise and that it does refer to pay restoration for prior years where there was a disparity between the cost of living and the awards given. So those three things combined were the key drivers behind arriving at what I think is a reasonable provision, and it is a provision of 5%. Whatever happens, though, we will, and as always, align ourselves with consideration of the civil service settlement before any decisions are taken.
So it's not an offer at this stage to staff?
Absolutely not, no.
Right. The staff know about the 5%?
We do. Know about it being a provision.
Okay. It'd be interesting to see how they respond to that in negotiations, but that's... just moving on in terms of staff numbers, how have you worked out how many staff you need? I mean, it's always potentially possible to come back for a supplementary estimate, as we've discussed, if the resources, financial resources, are not enough, but often very difficult to get supplementary staff in at short notice. So, just in terms of two big issues around how you've dealt with them, one is the issue of voter ID, which is going to become an issue for the general election now, when it's only been an issue for some local elections so far. The Commission specifically asked the government to consider more forms of voter ID to be put into use. You didn't specify what, because you said that wasn't your job, but you asked for more, and the government said they couldn't find any more. So are you thinking you may have more work to do in terms of advertising, promoting, engaging with the public on this issue before a general election?
So I'll come back on that first of all. I mean, you'll recall the meeting we had this time last year and the engagement we had with Minister Rowley at the time to really make sure we got the level of publicity budget that was going to fit with the facts on the ground and the sorts of ID that were going to be used. And we came up with a number that we thought would be the best value for money proposition that would get the message out to voters about what they needed to bring and how they would get a voter authority certificate if they were unable to bring that. So in a sense that situation is unchanged this year. So our budget estimates that we bring before you are based on the experience that we had from that campaign. And I mean, in many levels, that was one of the most successful campaigns we have run, in that it drove up voter understanding of the need to bring ID from 22% at the outset of the campaign up to 91%. So we've been able to learn from that. So who didn't we reach? So how do we reach them? And we'd highlighted some communities, disabled communities of various kinds in particular. So this year, first of all, we've looked at, so what has happened to that level of awareness since? And it stayed pretty high. It's 86% at the moment, and the Minister and his colleagues and we are both looking at that very carefully to work out what we can do to think about how we drive it up further, and in places like London, for example, it was always quite high because London sees national media, even though it didn't have to do voter ID. In other areas, so Scotland we're particularly looking at, because for the vast majority of Scotland, the general election will be the first time. So we're continually tracking that. So and the budget provision here is designed to make sure we have the right campaign with enough money attached to it to drive those recognition rates up as high as we possibly can, and certainly at least as high as we had last year.
One of the recognition rates that wasn't very high was the recognition you could go and get a voter certificate from the local authority.
It wasn't, and we must work on that. And I mean, I was very pleased this week for my own local authority to come through the door with, first of all, a piece of paper that had the list of ID that you should bring, with a QR code if you wanted to find out more, and specifically a QR code that linked directly to the government's website so that people could get onto it. So I think we've looked at all those stats basically, and we're really trying to think, so where are the gaps in terms of which people, and you're absolutely right, I think the voter authority certificate recognition was about 57%, which is a lot lower than the general recognition of 92%.
And the people who don't recognise, maybe the ones who need them as well, that was
Yes.
So,
although actually the numbers there weren't actually different, but it only really mattered for the ones who didn't. But the basic point of your question is we need to get to those people to make sure they know what to do and can do it.
What's your target rate for actually making people aware of that availability?
We have said one person who's turned away is one too many, so we will be going the extra mile to make sure that people are not turned away, and we're measuring those stats, and any fall off from that will be something we will be very disappointed about. In real life, we know the limits of campaigns, so I've said we got into the 90s last time. We're very pleased with that. We doubt whether we can get much better than that. In terms of other work we can do, the key to us there is working with other organisations who know their communities, local authorities in particular, but also particular charities and organisations that are working with those communities, and disability charities being a particular case in point.
One of the biggest challenges that you identify repeatedly is late delivery by government of regulations to implement policy. We're now potentially 2 months away from a general election, and there's still a lot of secondary legislation outstanding from previous electoral legislation that are stacked. There's a gut principle you should not legislate within 6 months of an election. We're not going to meet that, are we? Potentially.
No, we're not, and we would say that we should be having a situation where everything is sorted out, lined up, agreed, in place 6 months in advance for it to be introduced. We will not have that this time, and there are still work going on, particularly in relation to postal votes and also overseas voters. We are working with the government, and the Minister's colleagues are clearly very dedicated to solving some of the issues that we face. We had a meeting, in fact I'll invite Rob to say something, of the local authority administrators last week, and I think all I can say is we have not met the 6 month target, but we are absolutely determined to work with the local authority community and the government to ensure that in each local authority they are ready and are going to be able to process the votes and make sure everyone's vote gets counted.
Just to add to that, we have a regular meeting quarterly with the Minister's civil service colleagues, ourselves, and with representatives of those living elections at local level, returning officers and EROs. And as we go in towards May, we have those weekly, actually, so we're intensifying discussions with them. The discussion we had was people were quite wary, actually, of the additional processes which are to be placed for the first time in May. There will be particular pressure, of course, if the general election happened to be on the same day as the local elections, which remains a theoretical, at least, a possibility. it's not just understanding of the implications of new regulations. On the whole, that is there. Colleagues at local level are attentive to that, and it's certainly not ideal, the timing of the detail, but they have, I think, understood that well. But some of the systems required to make that work, including some of the national IT systems, are still being developed. Mechanisms for managing that situation are there, and I've been asked several times after that meeting how confident we can be of the local elections, and I read from colleagues who are running it at local level that there's determination, as ever, to make them work. But it certainly, back to your initial point, the timing of clarity and the timing of the systems being in place is not ideal. We will make it work.
So, if come a May election, say it's a general election as well, you can cope with changes on overseas voters and postal voters, and you've got all the staff you need to do that, and it'll all work smoothly and seamlessly, will it?
It will be hard work, and Vijay has already alluded to the dedication of our staff, and I think I speak for local authority staff as well from the ones I've met. We will do whatever it takes to make it work between us, and the Minister staff also, but it will be hard work because of this. But in terms of this particular estimate, we have put an estimate in here that we have designed to enable us to deliver our part of the deal.
I think that some of the highest patches, sorry if I can just say one more thing, will be at local level. We are confident we'll be able to manage it within our estimate. Some of the biggest pressures will be for local teams.
Presumably, depending on the election is, the later it is, obviously the more it will be bedded in, and local authorities will have more time in which to deliver on the overseas and all the other expectations.
Indeed.
Just taking you back, something you said, John, quite rightly, it dropped through your letterbox. These are the forms of identification. Your local authority, great job. You welcome the receipt of that envelope coming through, informing what you needed when you go to vote. Surely, I hope that that's gone through every letterbox and not just some local authorities taking it seriously and not this.
Well, it's just timely for this meeting that I had it, and so we have direct communications from the Electoral Commission, and I've seen our ad on TV, I've seen it on billboards, I saw it on the tube coming in the other day, so I'm kind of feeling that the message is getting out there. And so that particular one was just one I saw.
That's a very good political answer. I'll try again. The local authority that you live in sent you a nice envelope to say, by the way, when the election's called, local elections are coming. So it's not just about a general election, far from it. These are the forms of identification. This is what you need to do, etc., etc. Now, is that universal across local authorities doing it, or is it just that yours are more aware of what that needs to be done?
We haven't got a complete collection of all of them because different local authorities are doing it at slightly different times. We have got a template that they are generally using.
The answer is no, just so I've got it right.
It's a universal expectation, and we are keeping contact with all local authorities.
So hopefully that you may be able to push local authorities saying, look, I've just recognised this has been good for me to open this envelope. Can we get other local authorities for? Because it is good if it's universal rather than a salt and pepper pot approach to how it's been delivered. I think universal approach is much better. That will be very, very helpful. The second part is the fact that you couldn't give us one voter being turned away is one too many. I'm totally in agreement with that. What percentage are you working on is your expectation in the election? Not how many are bad, how many you're expecting percentage-wise.
Well, I mean, the things we are actively tracking are the numbers related to Mr. Bett's earlier question, that we are running a campaign at the moment, so we are seeking to get that campaign to people. We got to 92% last year, and we want to get to at least that this year. We doubt whether we can get much higher, so my answer to your question will be 92% and a little bit more if we can.
So what you're saying is 90% will vote or 80% to not. What I'm asking is, what percentage will fail to turn up with the right ID, in your opinion, or not be allowed to vote? You must have built a percentage band in what you...
So the two numbers that were significant from the May elections last year were the ones we will be seeking to improve upon this time. Was 0.25% of people who turned up at a polling station and wished to vote did not end up voting. And that's 0.25% too many, so that is a target to be beaten.
That's what I wanted to hear, so you're hoping to get below.
The other number, which is just as important number, that is only those that got as far as the polling station. Yeah. A lot of concerns, including ones in fact, when I talked to Mr. Betts' committee a few weeks ago, the issue of greeters and the fact that many people in many areas are not getting as far as the desk, so they don't get counted in those numbers. So we need to know about them too. So the way we find out about that is we do a nationally representative poll of all voters after the election, and we ask them without any prompts, did you vote, did you not vote, and if you did not vote, why didn't you vote? Now the number that we have been homing in on that's influenced my responses to Mr. Betts was 4% of people, unprompted, said that the voter ID requirement was the reason they did not vote last time. Now that is a number we really do want to get down, particularly given it was rather skewed. And it was 9% for people who declared themselves to be disabled. And so we were really worried about that, and we really want to make sure that we target our efforts, and we target the efforts of local authorities and others, and charities also, to support those people. So if they have difficulties, whatever they are, let's work out what they are. So blind and partially sighted people have particular difficulties. People with learning difficulties are another group that we really need to work towards. So that number is one we really want to drive down.
Presumably we'll get the information for the greeters. When we didn't establish that last time, presumably local authorities will gather that as the evidence to say it's been successful. The numbers are coming down as well.
We have got the template of the data that we will collect that will give us the equivalent numbers, so that 0.25% we'll get, and we will get the data on the greeters. And not all local authorities will use them, so we'll be able to look at the difference between what happened in those local authorities that did use them and did not use them. So we will have all that data, and as we did last year, we published the whole lot pretty quickly after the election so that people could have this conversation in a well-informed way.
Right. What I was asking was, we know people are greeting and saying, no, you can't because you've not got that. Surely that information will be gathered to make sure the accuracy of what we're saying. You're trying to find it other ways when actually we have somebody who is saying, no, that doesn't work, please go away. They may come back, they may not. But if we're not gathering that information, why are we not gathering it? And what are we doing to ensure that greeters passing that information into the centre? Because we're all on one side, we all want success on this. We want people to vote. But the only way we can establish that is having the right information in which to deliver the objective.
It is, yes. So the answer to that specific question is, and I observed it, and I'm sure you will have observed it as well, the situation in each polling station is different.
That's the problem.
And you can count consistently what happens at the desk. You can count consistently a sample of the population. Anything in between is going to be very unstable, let's put it that way. So someone going to the polling station meets their mate on the corner who says, oh, have you got ID? And they turn around and go away. A greeter can be something the local authority has officially put in place. It could be a teller. It could be the presiding officer who happens to meet someone at the door, and we've all seen these things. So to have a data collection process around one element of that wouldn't give us consistent results. What does give us some ability to judge what's going on is to get the data of what happened at the desk where there was a teller and where there was not a teller, so that you can start to think about, so what is this picture? And that's what we will try to build. So it's not a precise answer to your question because it's not a straightforward situation.
Believing that, the law of the land should be universally applied by police, I would expect and hope that we might get electoral return officers to actually establish the same rules that apply right across so there are no inconsistencies. It's a dream and a vision. I hope you will share it at some point. Minister.
Am I part of your dream and vision, Mr. Speaker?
Always.
John, can I just ask you to clarify? You just used the word teller there. You're not talking about those of us who sometimes stand outside polling stations wearing rosettes taking polling numbers, are you?
Well, I was, actually. I mean, they are someone who you might encounter on your way.
Could I strenuously urge, or urge strenuously rather than split my infinitive, I think that's a huge onus to place and is capable of being abused by having people who are there as party activists. You could see somebody with a sticker that says, I'm going to vote whatever, it's 2 minutes towards the close of poll, it's a tight seat, teller goes, oh no, sorry, no, you're not entitled to vote, you better dash home, and they lose the chance to vote. I don't think party political operatives should be involved with that. I mean, that's my...
I agree, and no, sorry, if I misspoke, then I apologise for misspeaking. I wasn't suggesting that at all. I was just suggesting in the vicinity of a polling station there are lots of people who are interacting with voters in different ways who may end up...
Yes. Well, I would much prefer to see guidance to say that they shouldn't be asking about that. Just on the day... What?
I'm just sorry. I could cross. If someone's there representing the party and they know that someone who's going to vote has to have an ID, it's just an informal conversation. Say, have you got your ID with you? You know you need it. It's going.
No. That may be allowable, but that is not the right ID. Go back and get another one. I don't think that's the job of tellers to be done.
No, but my intention...
And that is up to... But I do, Mr. Speaker, have two just specific questions. Because people will turn up to a polling station who are not actually registered to vote or are entitled to vote in some elections and not in others. So isn't the most pertinent figure we should all be focused upon is not those who were turned away per se, although it's an admirable ambition to see that reduced to as low as possible through the information campaign, but for those who are eligible, entitled to vote, that they are able to do so, even if it means they have to go away and come back. It's actually the number of people who don't come back, which I know is quite an odd way to look at it, but that's actually the key thing, those who are eligible to vote and just give up on the process. I think that's probably the actual figure we should be looking at. We did have a question just on the estimates, which takes Mr. Vincent's point about you didn't envisage having to come back and ask for more cash. And if you did, it would not be retrospectively, it would be in real time. Can you just assure us that the internal financial management regimes that you have are fleet of foot enough in order to make sure that it may be trying to put out a small ember rather than a massive conflagration?
I may want to bring David in, who manages that part of the organisation, but that has been something we've invested in quite significantly since we brought the main estimate to you last year. So we have a much stronger finance team. We have better information flows around finance. So I think we are fleeter of foot, as in your phrase. We are more across.
Well, I need to hear. Thank you very much, Mr. Vincent.
Okay.
Can I just clarify something? Sorry, Chair. Going back to the point about people turning up at polling stations who might not have correct ID or any ID, what level of information are electoral registration officers, returning officers, required to record? Because we talk about the information we gathered, we know this many, but is there any requirements for them to record people who turned up, who didn't have ID and were turned away?
Yes.
And are there any other mechanisms for recording whether they then subsequently returned, which I think is the point that the Minister... Okay, but it's the periphery, if they're not at the actual desk, that is the grey area.
Precisely, yes. And just while you've asked that question, to reassure the Minister, we're talking about eligible voters here. So there's a very precise, consistent across the country, to help Mr Speaker, approach to collecting this data that every returning officer is required to do. Yep. And it's a schedule we work with the Minister and his team on so that is consistent and can be operated across the country.
Has the outturn of previous elections been publicly available?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So moving on, if I may just quickly probe a bit further on the cyber security costs, which have increased by $1 million year on year, and the breakdown of this increase this year is 57% higher than the main estimate for last year. Can I just probe a little bit more on that? Because there's a reference, is it about being sort of compliant to a certain security standard, or can you just explain a little bit more about that?
Shall I come in on that? You remember we had the cyber attack some time ago now. Actually, this has now become part of our overall investment, really, in our IT systems and our data management. As I think the Chair has mentioned, we've taken the advice of the National Cybersecurity Committee over how we should tighten up our processes. That was some time ago now, actually. Since then, we've had some very specialist advice about precisely what that means. And that's led really to the £1 million you've drawn attention to. About half of that is the cost of taking our data and our systems and placing them on the cloud, and on the cloud behind some very high security arrangements. So in a sense, that's a combination of cybersecurity expenditure and also just advancement of our systems and our data management. So that's actually over half of the £1 million. There's other elements which are about improving our firewalls. There's elements about employing an external agency to monitor consistently, 24 hours a day, whether we are under any sort of attack, so that we can respond immediately if that occurs. And there's some investment actually in our handheld bits of kit and multi-factor identification and that sort of process. That is what's in, and we've also actually now have made arrangements for all our data to be held in 2 reserve places, so that this is always a business and make sure we stay in business if we do have another cyber attack. We've always had a secondary data provision, but that's actually been within our own systems, and now we have a quite separate external one, so that we have a sort of double level of security over that, and that's cost us some more money. That's £1 million, though, as ever, there is a contingency in there as well, actually. There's 200,000 in there against the possibility that there's further advice we get, which requires yet further expenditure in that area.
Thank you. And just a little bit of a final push on the forecast for the general election costs at just over £9 million. We've touched quite a lot on that and what that will be used for, particularly around staffing. Any further sort of breakdown on that and the assessment of the risk for any unforeseeable costs? We've talked a lot about contingency, but potentially for the impact on the general election, whatever it's called.
Yeah, so actually the vast majority of the 9 million isn't for our own staff. Nearly all of that, about 7.5 million, is for the contracts we let to agencies for public information campaigns of various sorts. For registration, and that's already underway, and in preparation for whenever the general election has occurred, and for some other electoral events during the year. So just over 4 million for voter ID related communications and information sharing, and about 3 million for registration. And that, you'll know, this is a regular process for us, and we've got a very strong approach to making sure we get value for money for that. We tend to go for 2-3 potential contractors off the nationally approved list. And we also review and analyse the impact of what goes on, and we've been over some of those figures already this afternoon. So that's it's a particularly high level of expenditure because of the number of events in the year and the scale of the general election implications and the implications of the Elections Act. But the actual process is fairly well rehearsed for us. An element is for our own staff. We take on temporary fixed-term contract staff to manage our end of that process during the year. The element goes to digital activity. A lot of that actually is around advice to campaigners and to local administrators. Our staff is about 500,000, and the remainder of it is for the handbooks which we provide for every local administration, and part of that is for their translation into Welsh. But the vast majority is actually for contracted communication strategies.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everybody. Can I first of all say thank you very much for coming. John, good to see you as ever. Can I put on record the committee's appreciation to Rob Vincent for his 8-year service as a Commissioner and latterly as the Interim Chief Executive. We understand your term is also finishing as a Commissioner, but we do wish you well and thank you for all the support that you've given. That concludes our public session for today. The committee will now deliberate in private. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.